Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here and to kind of uh, give you some insight into where I'm coming from with this. This is we're going to be talking about kids and sports and things, and I was very much personally of the mindset of like I kind of want to not actually get my kids super involved in organized sports until maybe they're older. I figure when they're 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, I want them to just be having some free play and things like that. But now my daughter, who's 15, is really into field hockey, and I'm psyched that she's like in this team sport and getting all these like team sport benefits and things like that. And you have researched team sports and the kind of the way it's changed and over the years in your book, More Than Just a Game. And I was just wondering about like what inspired you to do this research, and if there was some kind of personal moment that made you think that we really needed to talk about this.
Sure. Well, I wrote the book More Than a Game with a colleague of mine, Bill Hoynes, and we decided to go on this journey after an informal conversation. We shared that as parents, we felt like the current state of youth sports was so different from what we had experienced as kids, and it's become so intense and profit driven and pressurized. And even though we felt like we had a good handle on, the industry, we had trouble making good decisions for our kids because we had no experience to draw from. When we were kids, you played for the local Little League or AYSO team or for your high school, and that was kind of it. But things have changed so radically, and now parents experience incredible pressure when the kids are still in elementary school to specialize, to do whatever they can to give their kids competitive edges. And that isn't always in the interests of the kids themselves. And so we were motivated to do this project and write the book to give parents information that would help them make wise decisions for their kids.
And what sports were your kids doing?
They were playing, they both played soccer and baseball, and I actually coached one of my kids' soccer teams. And so you would think that I would have this depth of experience that would make me really secure when I had to make decisions for my own sons. But it's really hard also because you get so emotionally wrapped up in it, and that makes it difficult to kind of step back and have a balanced perspective. And so we wrote the book with the intent of helping parents kind of gain that larger perspective and not get sucked in and just do whatever all their friends were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that emotional component of, you're proud of your kid, you're excited for you're kind of living vicariously through them in some way. And also you don't want to hold them back, all of these things. But your book talks about how taxing the athletics can be developmentally for children. And I'm wondering, what are some of the ways, can we pull this out? Like, are competitive sports actually hindering kids' growth?
Right. I think for a lot of kids they are, and that occurs on a couple of different levels. So one, if we look at the physical effects on kids, because young athletes are being pressured to specialize and play one sport all year round when they're still 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that has implications for their bodies. They're not fully developed. And if you're playing a single sport 11, 12 months in a year, that puts great stress on your bodies. We also interviewed physical therapists and college coaches, and they found that there's been a large increase in injuries to knees, shoulders, elbows, ankles, because young bodies aren't built to withstand those kind of pressures. But I would also add there's implications for students' mental health, kids' mental health, that kids feel pressure now because our identities are so wrapped up in how they perform in a single sport, that if they don't feel like they're living up to expectations, that can create stress and all sorts of psychological impact. And also, if they're specializing when they're 8 or 9 or 10, what happens if they no longer are interested in that sport? So you know very well that kids' interests change as they get older. But today, a lot of kids feel this pressure to specialize and stick to a single sport. when they're in elementary school, and their whole identity gets caught up in that sport. So it's hard to step back, to let low, to maybe engage in that sport less intensively. And especially with young women, that can have real serious consequences where they kind of lose their sense of self if they're not performing at a high level in gymnastics or softball or basketball, whatever the sport may be.
Yeah, we were talking about it this morning, and someone who works on the Mindful Mama Mentor team was saying, yeah, I was into figure skating, and it was really intense. You're saying that it can have these detrimental effects. Like, how does it affect kids? If, say, you've done a sport very intensely, and then you get injured out or age out, or you're just not good enough at some young age, like 12 or 14 or something,
Right.
How does that affect kids?
Right. It can be devastating because I think when we were kids, we were engaged in many different activities. So you or I may have played, I don't know, basketball for a couple of months and then swam for a couple of months and then been in a play. And so that reduced the pressure. If someone wasn't doing as well in any one activity, they had all these different ways to show that they were accomplished or talented or just really interesting people. But now, because they often specialize in one thing, that if they're cut or if they get injured or whatnot, it causes them to question their own self-worth, and that's not healthy for anyone. And we're especially seeing that when people get to the stages of high school where they're starting to develop from adolescence into adults, and when that grounding, that foundational part of their development gets yanked from under them, they can get really depressed.
Yeah. And I imagine there's this, it's a huge time commitment, right? Like, I know that people spend lots of time traveling and doing all these things and maybe practicing every day with pretty young kids. And how do you see these schedules affecting family life, and also thinking about the idea of a child's opportunity for downtime, creativity, and free play, these things that I was really trying to prioritize when my kids were little?
Absolutely. And what we found also is that most parents sign their kids up to play sports with really good intentions. They want their children to get some exercise, to make friends, to nowadays they're attracted to the idea that they aren't going to just sit in front of a computer all the time. And most importantly, to have fun. That's why most kids start playing sports. But what we found is that can shift really quickly now. So maybe for a year or two, the child will play in a recreational league or with neighborhood kids or informally. But now parents are under this pressure to do whatever they can to make their children exceptional. And that means oftentimes signing up for these competitive travel teams. And they get sucked into that very quickly. And they think if they don't sign their kids up for sporting activities, that practice 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a week, that their child is going to be at a disadvantage. And as a result of that, the time commitment, the financial commitment escalates really quickly. And there's a good chance that a 9-year-old will be playing volleyball 4 days a week, traveling to a different state, being pressured to go to summer camps. And then that affects the athlete, but it also affects their whole family because parents have these feel compelled to drive them to away tournaments, to invest a lot of money. I mean, we met many parents who were struggling financially, but they would do whatever they could to pay the fees for these teams and tournaments. And the other thing I'd mention is other kids in the family are affected because the parents become so obligated to spend so much time supporting that one child's athletic career that oftentimes other children in the family are neglected and feel like they aren't getting the attention from their parents. So it affects almost everyone. We talked to one parent who said, when you sign up a child for a travel team, you're signing the whole family up.
Yeah. And I'm curious about, do the kids, how do they gauge, how do you gauge whether your kid is really loving this or enjoying this enough to justify that kind of stress and expense on the family, but also like that, I mean, for me, that piece about not having time for free play or not having downtime, I imagine that's also maybe setting them up for, we know that free play leads to creativity, and that's how little kids work out their world. That's how kids, process different things that have happened to them. Downtime is when creativity happens. That's when you get like the great big box and all of those things. And I've seen, how that creativity can lead to, creativity as an older person too. I mean, so I'm just wondering about sort of the losses of these things as well.
Right, right. And one of the messages that we really emphasize in the book is the importance of creating balance in kids' lives. That when parents are making decisions about what team to sign up their child to sign their child up for, or what activity will work best for them, to try and put together kind of a collection of activities, some that may challenge them physically, some that may challenge them artistically, others that will encourage them to collaborate with others, and that it's really important to structure their extracurricular lives so there is that balance, that they are developing their bodies, their minds, their ability to interact with other kids. But that can get thrown out of whack when the child at age 8 is playing baseball 5 days a week with no downtime. And then on top of that, there's so much stress early on to try and attract the attention of college coaches, to be better than others rather than to work in collaboration with their peers. And one parent told us that the whole sports world today is very time consuming. The time commitment, the financial commitment is more than you expect, and you have to be really, really prepared for that. And another told us that it may seem like a child is going to benefit from this more intense sports environment, but the pressure ratchets up very quickly and creates pressure on their kids. And so it's so important to create space where kids can, and to talk to their kids about what they're doing, so they can let the parent know that they want to scale back a little bit, or maybe they want to stop playing field hockey and be in a play instead, or to do something else. And that maybe they'll come back to sports later, but to make that flexibility part of family life.
It's so interesting to me because I think, like, I've thought about this when my girls were in swim team. We had a local swim team. I loved swim team because they learned how to swim really well, got them out of the house in the morning.
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah, the swim team was great. I thought it was great. But then I would go to these meets, and the meets were so long. And I'm thinking to myself, like, adults have designed this. We have made this as long and painful for ourselves as we can. And why did they do this? Like, adults designed this. Why did they make this as long and painful, like 5-hour events, 6-hour events as they are? And I don't understand it. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, like, I have kind of two questions here. I'm thinking, you're talking about the investment that families are making and the pressure to make all this investment. Like, maybe for some people, like, that, I mean, does it pay off for some people? I don't know. Like, when you're thinking about that investment, is it worth it? You're saying there's all these downsides, but also, why is it evolved this way? Like, I don't understand. It doesn't seem like it's in the best interest of kids for it to be so competitive, and so to be driving so far away, and to have it cost so much money. I don't really understand why adults have designed it to make it this way.
Right. You're absolutely right. And this all started to change in the 1980s. So before that point, most kids were playing in local recreational leagues or at their schools or whatnot. But then, due to cuts in programming for sports, a lot of families didn't have opportunities to do those kinds of things. And what happened was these private entrepreneurs stepped in and saw that this was a market, that they could make a lot of money creating these opportunities for kids. And those sports entrepreneurs are the ones who created the travel teams, the private coaching, the specialized clinics, all of that. And as a result, it wasn't everyday parents that were making a lot of these decisions. It was private groups that were trying to make money off sports, and they marketed themselves very, very well. And they put they kind of planted the seed in parents that you needed to sign your kid up for as many different activities as possible, or you weren't a good parent. And this was all tied into this shift towards intensive parenting that we can see in all aspects of life. So, for example, since the 1980s, there's been a tremendous growth in chances to sign up for private coaches to help your kid learn to do well on the balance beam, but also almost anything they want to do. For example, we found out that there are private spelling bee coaches who charge upwards of $300 so that kids can compete at the national level in the spelling bee. So part of it is these groups and individuals who are trying to make money, but part of it is also that parents are having trouble making decisions that ignore maybe what they really want for their children long term. So I'd just like to read a short excerpt of an interview I conducted with some parents.
Sure.
So a father we interviewed said, "I think there's a problem, and we're all part of the problem. We're all paying the fees and driving kids to these tournaments and worrying about winning games. We all have the right intentions, but we don't always follow through on them." And what was really interesting is the wife followed up with, "I disagree. I don't think we all have the best intentions. I think a lot of parents want their kids to become professional athletes. It's disgusting. When I see what my kid is going through, it makes me worry." So there's this loss of agency that parents can't make decisions independent of these outside pressures, of this intensive parenting trend. And also a lot of times kids' voices are lost. So one thing that we really encourage parents to think about is what kind of communication are they having with their kids, and are they checking in with them and asking them how they're enjoying a particular sport, if they need a break, if they want to try something else, and letting them know if you want to reset, that's totally fine. We'll support you whether you're on the all-star team or whether you decide that you wanted to be in Model UN.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting though, because I guess I can see that you want to, as a parent, you don't want to encourage your kid to quit, right? You want them to see it out, etc. I remember feeling that tension when one daughter didn't want to do swim team, and I was like, oh well, I don't want to encourage her to quit. We don't want our kids to be quitters, right? That's like the worst thing you could possibly be in American culture, is to be a quitter, right? Because we're in a culture of working hard. Yeah, at the same time, we do want to balance that with trusting them, having them have awareness of their own bodies and their own lives, and whether they feel too much pressure or too much time in their schedule and things like that. I don't know. How do we navigate that?
Well, I think part of it is, as I mentioned, just establishing open communication lines and constantly asking them how they're feeling about what they're doing. Another thing is to keep in mind what you ultimately hope your child is going to get out of playing these sports. So we interviewed hundreds of parents, and what we heard again and again was that what they really valued was the life lessons that their children get out of sports. Persistence, commitment, the ability to work with others, all those kinds of things. And not to lose sight of the fact that the kid might develop those skills, probably will develop them, regardless of the specific team they're on. They don't have to be at the most competitive level to learn persistence. And that sometimes it's in the kid's best interest not to aim for a college scholarship when that may not be what they even want. And on top of that, the reality is that between 1 and 2% of all kids who play high school sports end up getting a college scholarship. 1 to 2%. But what's happened is because of this huge expansion of the travel team industry, there are millions more kids that are playing for a travel team, and a lot of times their parents think if my kid is on the travel team, that they have a good shot at playing for the University of Michigan or getting a scholarship to UCLA. But that reality doesn't match what is likely to happen with their kid. And so it's really important to stay focused on those life lessons and how the kids are developing as people and not necessarily where they rank on the hierarchy of athletes.
Yeah, I guess, you want to say, like, is my kid super motivated to do this? Is the child driving this, or is something else driving this? And you answered that question. Does it pay off? 1 to 2% maybe get these scholarships to go on, and yeah, and the kids are, yeah, where are they in this conversation? I mean, I guess that was another question, is the idea of, like, are there other levels that they can be involved in? Can they drop back? And then how do parents communicate that, when all the other families around them are doing this travel team, and maybe this kid's in soccer, and everybody else is going to aim for the travel team. How do you say no to that when there's that pressure for everybody else to be doing it? And how do you have that conversation with your child?
That's a great question. And I'm glad you asked it, because we are not, Bill Hoynes, my co-writer, and I are not anti-travel team. We're not against the idea that a child who's really motivated to specialize in a sport should do that. But we are against the idea that you need to do that when your child is really young to get a competitive advantage, to help them become the best athlete that they can. We are just arguing that try and delay that specialization until they're physically ready to, to play a sport year round, and also mentally prepared to commit to a sport. Because if you push them into doing that, or even accepting that when they're too young, they're likely to burn out physically or mentally. And as I said, when my kids were young, I kind of bought into that. I thought if I don't get them to play this sport intensively early, they're going to lose out. But what I've learned through this research is that if you're talented enough to get a college athletics scholarship, you're likely to stand out whether you start playing that sport when you're 8 or whether you're 12. And there's no rush. A kid is not going to lose out on future opportunities if they wait to specialize. But we're just saying, hold off until they're ready for that. And then maybe for some kids, it makes sense to join a team that plays their sport against teams in other states and regions. But for a lot of kids, it will make more sense to just play for the local Babe Ruth team, or to play on or to swim on their high school swim team. And they're likely to get a lot out of it, even if they're not the state champion. I mean, how many kids are going to be state champion in the 100 butterfly? Not very many, but a lot of kids can be on the swim team and get a lot out of it, even if they're the third best butterfly swimmer on their team.
Yeah, all those lessons of teamwork and perseverance and all those things. Now, thinking about this idea of delaying, for your child's physical development, mental development, to be well-rounded. I read Kim Payne's book, Simplicity Parenting, and he talks about the idea that when kids are younger, what they're needing in a lot of ways is that free play, right? And that's been talked about through a lot of people, many people describe this free play being the work of childhood. And then in Simplicity Parenting, he talks about, like when kids are in adolescence, their brains get a little more chaotic, and this is when they need that structure, right? When they get to these older ages. Is there an age that you guys discovered that is a good time for entering structured sports that you may want to give your kids some more free time maybe until this age?
Well, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, things shifted radically in the 1980s and
Mm-hmm.
have escalated since then. Prior to that time, most kids connected with sports in the way that you mentioned, playing, you know, casual sports on their street with other kids in the neighborhood or playing through their school. Um, but now a lot of those opportunities have disappeared as funding has been cut, but they're still out there. Um, but we recommend that parents encourage their kids to sample. It's called sports sampling, as many different sports as they can until they're in middle school. And that's usually when their bodies have developed, and it's also when they will have a clearer sense of what they're really motivated to do, whether it's sports, whether it's ballet, whether it's playing the trombone. And at that point, it probably makes sense for a lot of kids to specialize, but no need to do that before then.
Okay.
If you
All
think
right.
about it, Michael Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
famous story, Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball
Oh
team
yeah. Mm-hmm.
until he was a sophomore, and he seemed to do pretty well.
Yeah, he did all right. He did okay. Yeah. Okay, so for families who are maybe listening and are already deep into this competitive sports world, what are some early warning signs that things might be tipping into an unhealthy territory that they may want to watch out for?
Right. So I would say there are physical signs and there are mental signs for them to look out for. The first thing is to notice if they're experiencing any stress on parts of their body. So if they're playing baseball and their arms are getting sore, if they're soccer players and they're having aches in their knees, any of those kinds of physical injuries that might stem from relying on certain muscle groups because they're playing a single sport all the time. That's when it's time to go see a pediatrician to have them looked at. And a pediatrician is a great resource also in terms of getting conversations starting with your kids, where it may take the pressure off you as a parent when there's someone else in the room that has a lot of experience that can talk about why it may not be the best thing to play one sport so intensively. So the physical is one side of it, and the other is the mental. So I think as long as kids really want to go to practice, they talk enthusiastically about their games or whatnot, then they're probably in the right place. And as I mentioned, for some kids it makes sense to specialize. Some kids just really want to focus on gymnastics or whatever it will be. But if you see your child making up excuses that they don't want to go to practice, or they talk about missing birthday parties, things like that, or if they just seem fatigued, physically or mentally, then that's a great time to step back and rethink. And some pediatricians who have studied this topic have mentioned that even kids who specialize should probably take off 1 or 2 months a year just so their bodies and minds can recover and they'll be kind of energized and ready to go again. But unfortunately, for a lot of kids today, sports is 12 months a year, 7 days a week, and they don't have those breaks.
Okay, and then for parents who want to have their kids enjoy sports without burning out, that what practical steps right now that can they do to keep joy and play and having fun at the center of this whole thing?
I would say not to lose sight of the fact that there are lots of options out there, that a child can be really successful and happy playing on the Little League team. They don't have to be on the team that travels across the country, and they'll derive a lot of satisfaction and learn a lot through that. And then the other thing I would say is, as I mentioned, to talk to them as much as possible. And finally, to put a little time and effort when they're making these decisions. So again, when I think of what I did as a parent, I just kind of followed the herd, and
Mm.
what my kids' friends were doing, I figured that was what my kid should be doing. And sometimes that worked out and sometimes it didn't. But what we learned from parents, and I would add college coaches, was that parents have options, they just may not be aware of them. So they don't have to sign up for the team that's closest to their town. And it's really a great idea to go and observe teams' practices, see how the coaches are treating the players, talk to the coaches if possible, ask what their goals are, get a sense of the obligations, because it's really hard to get information about how much it's going to cost to play for a team these days, how many months a year they're going to play, all of that. And you have to invest a little time and effort in it, but it's worth that effort. And ultimately will help you make the decision that's going to help your kids. So maybe your daughter will do better playing for the basketball team two towns down than it is the one that's nearby that may be too intense.
That's a good idea. I mean, because, yeah, I've seen that even in my daughter starting high school sports and starting these team sports in high school. You sign up and then you learn about it all afterwards. So what a good idea. Like, let's find out what's going on ahead of time. This makes a lot of sense.
I would add that we came across some really inspiring coaches who really built up the self-esteem of their players and also maintained high standards that competed at high levels. We talked to coaches who were really happy when the soccer players on their team also, they would take a couple months off and run for the track team, because they said, well, that helped them develop different muscles that actually were really valuable when they played soccer. But more importantly, one coach in particular told us that when a girl on her team stopped for a month or so or missed a couple of games to run track, they came back to soccer with this renewed enthusiasm, and they were so happy to be there. And so there are coaches like that. We came across a lot of them. You just got to find them.
All right. And for parents with wanting to navigate this and wanting to be a good supportive parent, yet maybe putting on the brakes a little bit if they're seeing too much pressure in their community, any final words of advice for these parents to be able to make choices that are best for their family?
I think it all goes back to this idea of balance, of trying to find ways to structure your child's life so that they are engaged in all sorts of activities, whether they're sports or arts related or academic, and letting your kid know that you value the choices they make and you're going to support them regardless of what they do, and to help them find ways to engage their minds and bodies that aren't tied to just one single activity.
I love that. And kind of what I'm hearing you say with that is that it's like a little bit of detachment is needed here. A little bit of, this isn't you, this isn't your life, this is your kid's life. Let this be more their choice, more their chat. This is not you, this is not your problem, this is not your life, right? To step away a little.
That's exactly what I was about to say. And that is to try and separate yourself from your child's success. That it's really easy to let your own needs get projected onto your child. And so you want your child to kind of do the things you couldn't do as a kid. Your ego is wrapped into their success, and that's not good for anyone. It's really important to kind of step back and think what you want may not be what your child wants. And on top of that, to celebrate them, whether they score the winning goal or whether they try their best and end up losing. It doesn't reflect on you as a parent. You can be a wonderful parent regardless of how your kid ranks on the athletic hierarchy.
I love that. Those are, I think, great words to close with. Chris Bjork, and I'm sorry, I don't have your co-author's name written down.
Bill Hoynes.
Bill Hoynes' book is More Than Just a Game. I recommend it if you're in this world struggling. It's out now. Thank you, Chris, for taking the time from your schedule to talk to us and to share this. I can't believe we've never talked about this on the podcast before, and I think it's such an important issue. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for shining the light on this topic because I think it's so important, and I really hope that parents can get the information that they need to make good choices for their families and for their kids.